Last of the Incas. It was the last days of the year 2012. Witnessing the fragility of poverty that placates half the world, I intend to create a story. Browsing old books, I found that history is not written as it happened. Some history is a lie, I thought. One good day while working, a friend tells me how helpful I am to everyone. Lewis, these people really depend on you. I can make warriors of them, I answered. I could write a book with them as characters. You know what I would call my book? I would call it, The Last of the Incas, I answered my friend without waiting for an answer. From that day on, riding the bus to work I began writing The Last of the Incas, a fictitious book, in which I revive Huascar, the penultimate Inca of Peru. Not only that, I put him on a collision course with the conquistadors. I present a small description of this book. The story begins like this. A noble old lady, numbed by her medicine, sat at the window watching the sun go down. It was a Saturday night. She did not know, but that night she was going to receive a visit that would keep her from returning to her bed at the usual time. She prepares to retire to her bed, says good night to her loved ones and goes to her room when the doorbell rings. Her granddaughter Raquel goes to open the door. Augusto, Monica and Neil, her son-in-law, her daughter, and her grandson, who call her old Alejandrina, have come, forcing her to stay in the living room. She says that she is tired, and that she was just going to bed. Well, tonight you will not sleep, because we have come to visit you, say the newcomers. She sits on the couch surrounded by her grandchildren. I'm going to rest, she insists. You children can play together. But they plead with her saying, so you do not want us to be by your side? No, that is not true. You are still young, but I am an old woman. I would hinder you, she says. Roberto, one of her grandchildren, the son of Victoria, sits next to her, and with a flirtatious smile says, maybe you can tell us a story, so we won't feel bored? A story? No children, I do not tell stories. It is my sister who knew how to tell stories. She told stories to your mother and all your uncles when they were children, says the noble old lady. I'm sure you must know some fairy tale, says Roberto. The old woman scratches her head. Yes, I know a story that I've never told anyone. Can you tell us? Can you tell us, please, Granny? Another day, she tells them. I'm tired now. Please, Granny, tell us that story, please. Their pleas convince the old woman, and asking not to be interrupted, she begins her story. There was a man named Louis. He had a dream of freedom. He dreamed of freeing his land and his people from the invasion it had suffered. He lived a routine life. He did not live alone. He lived with his faithful pet called Nino, from home to work, and work to home. On one occasion he was hired to do a job in a land far away and accepted the job, wanting to take advantage of the opportunity to travel. But he couldn't leave his small pet alone. It happened that George, his best friend, was going to the same holiday area as his father, a prominent surgeon, vacationed there every summer in those mountains. So George departed by car, in the company of Nino towards Aspen, Colorado. Louis would go days later, because he would go by plane. The day come for Louis to travel. He prepared his tools and left for the airport, boarded the plane, and hours later arrived in Aspen. He was greeted cheerfully by George and Nino, who took them to the hotel provided by the company that hired him. George invited him to come to his father's house for dinner the next day. He also mentioned that he'd met Alexei, another friend of theirs, who was also there in the Rocky Mountains for work. So, I will come with Alexei to pick you up after you finish installing your project tomorrow. Louis accepted the invitation. The next day he got up early and took the free taxi service offered by the hotel to the huge, expensive hotel where he'd be working. The inspector in charge of supervising him was surprised to see him with his pet, and asked if he'd brought him on the plane. Louis answered that a friend had brought him from New York, by car. The inspector explained the details to Louis. He finished his work at the indicated time, and said goodbye to the inspector, who also said goodbye to them. Pretty puppy. I like his two colors, he told Louis as they were walking away from the huge hotel. Outside, he found Alexei and George waiting for him. Hey guys, you miss me so much, you came so far to see me. You shouldn't have. I'm okay. You don't need worry about me so much. Both say, we missed you a lot. We can't live without you. Let's go to my father's house. There'll be a delicious dinner tonight, says George, as the four of them climb into the old car and disappear into the valley, driving through a beautiful landscape that Louis compared with the town of his parents in the valley of Cuzco. Well, this is not the town of your parents and is nothing like Cuzco, Alexei said. After 10 minutes of driving, the panorama was so beautiful they decided to pull over to look at the view of the river cutting through the valley. They parked the car by the side of the road and got out to admire the view. This air is so pure, Louis said. Yes, it is, Alexei responds. Can we go down to the river and get our feet wet? Louis asked. George said yes. So they started the steep descent. Nino ran ahead. He wasn't wearing his leash. Suddenly he felt uneasy and started to howl. That surprised everyone, because Nino very rarely barked or howled. When Louis came closer to see what was wrong, Nino started to run again, but unfortunately his collar got caught in the bushes. Louis caught up with him, trying to get him untangled, just as there was loud tremor. Louis had just released Nino when the rock beneath them yielded from its foundations and fell down the valley wall towards the river, dragging them both with it. George and Alexei rushed to help him, but in vain. The gap ripped into the earth by the huge plummeting rock created a landslide behind it, dragging George and Alexei down too. So all four of them were very suddenly in the river. They'd lost consciousness for some minutes with Nino running around all of them, but soon began to regain their senses. Louis, half submerged in the river, is pulled to the shore, and amazingly is only badly bruised on his forehead. They were all bruised, but Louis got hit the worst when rolling down to the river, because his head took a bad blow on the rock that fell with him. After recovering a little they decide to climb back up the cliff. George points with one hand which way to climb, and as they're looking up to the edge of the cliff, they notice the presence of a woman there. Imagining that George is pointing to her, she dashes out of sight. They come with great difficulty to the top of the cliff, and sit for a few minutes to rest, because the oxygen in spite of being pure is scarce due to the altitude, more than 2,000 meters above sea level. Standing up, George's eyes widen because there's no sign of his car. Where's my car? Someone stole it? How is that possible? I still have the keys. It must have been that woman we saw at the edge of the cliff. But as they look around, they see the same woman still spying on them from a distance. When she notices she's been seen again, she runs as if she'd seen the devil. Alexei says, that is not a woman. That's a man in a woman's dress. It's a woman, says George. Me too, says Louis. I think that was a woman. Alexei says, you guys are old. That person is a man, not a woman. You guys need glasses. George says, I left them in my car, my cell phone too. Alexei says, listen young men, whoever took the car, they took the road too. There was a road here when we parked. Louis says, I don't remember. Alexei says, you guys are too old. You don't remember anything. George asks, how did they start my car? I know it's old, but it still needs a key. Alexei asks, how far is your father's house? George responds, about half a mile from here. Alexei says, okay, then let's start walking. When we get to your father's house, you can report your car stolen. The four of them decide to walk. What they thought would be a short trip ended up being a long walk. They walked and never came to the house. Night fell on them. Not only that, the sky threatened to rain. They had no choice but to spend the night there in the middle of the valley. They huddled underneath the edge of a huge boulder, and the rain fell heavily. From time to time the sky was lit by lightning, which is very common in that area at that time of year. The morning arrived, and they're concerned by not having found the house. They decided to return to the city, and set out on their way back. But after taking only a few steps, they're intercepted by 6 individuals dressed as Native Americans. Shouting, and forcing them to stop, one of them attacks Louis, throwing him to the ground. Why are you attacking my friend? George and Alexei object, but get no answer. After Louis got up, they tie Nino's mouth closed, and make all of them follow the course of the river until they come to a stream where they turn, following it up into the mountains. As they walked up the mountain, they kept asking questions, but were forced to remain silent. They continued to beat Louis while they climbed. Alexei began to understand what they were saying. These people are speaking Quechua. He said, Quechua? These are Native Americans. Why are they speaking Quechua? George asks. They did not resist being forced to follow, afraid of the knives and swords they carried with them. While they were climbing higher up the mountain, Louis seems to recognize the area. He wonders to himself, where did all this come from? Everything resembles the landscapes of South America. It was true. Everything was just like the Andean landscapes. Upon arriving at the village, Louis was tied to a pole in the middle of a plaza. George, Alexei and Nino were tied against the wall. Suddenly a native comes out from a hut shouting in his language, "Why have you come back? Do you want to make fun of what your brother has done to us?" As he said that, he beat Louis. At one point Louis tried to defend himself, causing the crowd to come closer to see the fight. Louis stood up, his hands still tied together around the post, and trying to avoid being hit by the bitter individual, managed to climb to the top of the post. By slipping his bound hands over the top of the post, he freed himself and began fighting with his hands still bound, and realizes that people have sympathy for him. They're rooting for him. An old native with many adornments jumps in, cuts his hands free, and gives him a wooden club. Now he is armed. It's a fair fight. He defeats his aggressor, and as he strips him of his weapon, he sees that all the fingers on both his hands have been cut off halfway. Not wanting to still appear aggressive to the crowd, he throws his weapon away. In return, the tribe free George, Alexei, and Nino too. Not only that, the whole tribe are suddenly treating Louis with royal respect. George and Alexei wonder what's happening. Why so much tribute to Louis? The well-adorned native comes to Louis, asks his forgiveness and bows before him. Alexei asks Louis if he knows these people. Louis has no idea who they are. Alexei says again, "These people are speaking Quechua. The guy who hit you said, 'Why did you come back?' To see what your brother has done to us." "It seems like they think I'm someone else," Louis says. "My family is from this area. Maybe I have some relative who looks just like me." That was the reality. They had confused Louis with someone else, but he did not know with whom. Accepting the apology of the one who seemed to be the chief of the tribe, they were invited to eat some food. Then they were taken to a second village. The chief there explains they must go to a third village, even higher, where only the nobles go to talk to the gods. As they climbed higher up the mountain, Louis thought maybe he was hallucinating from the blows he'd taken while fighting earlier. So many coincidences, he said to himself. Too many coincidences. These people, the terraced landscape, llamas. Where did they come from? And the Quechua that Alexei thinks they're speaking? And there were hairless dogs he recognized as local to the area where he'd grown up. Everything here belongs to the Andes. How did all this happen? Something caught his attention. He ran to a megalithic rock, saying, "I know this rock, I know this rock. This is Cuzco. We are in Cuzco." George and Alexei both say it cannot be. "We're in Aspen. This is still Aspen." Louis looks his former aggressor in the eye, asking, "Who did that to you?" Indicating with a glance his missing fingers. Clasping his hands together, trying to hide his shame, he says, "Your brother, your older brother, Atahualpa did it to me." Alexei holds his head in amazement as he translates. The answer perplexes all three of them. "Who do you think I am? What's my name? What's my name?" Louis asks, clutching the aggressor. Alexei translates, "The Lord of the Lands, the son of Huayna Capac, the great Lord Huascar." "Oh my God," Alexei said, very exited. "This isn't possible. There is no explanation for this. Something is wrong here. Is this some sort of bad joke?" Louis asks again, "What did he say?" Alexei explains. He says, "Your name is Huascar, son of Huayna Capac, Lord of the Lands." Louis was as stunned as Alexei, and is becoming more and more emotional as they continue to climb towards the third village, followed by his friends and Nino. "I've been here. I was here. I came to these ruins with a friend in 1999, Alexei exclaims. "This is not possible. How did we get here? Was it the river? The river carried us back to the past? This makes no sense," he shouts loudly. "These people think you're Huascar. They're talking about Atahualpa as if he's alive. That means that he hasn't been captured and killed by Francisco Pizarro yet, he says, excited and amazed. We could change history. We can warn him and keep him from being captured and killed, Lewis exclaims. No, no, no. What are you talking about? This isn't happening. This is some sort of bad joke. I'm leaving, Alexei says. I'm going to follow the river back to the city. None of this is real. For the trip to that village, the chief of the tribe was accompanied by an entourage, a priestess with many decorations, and his concubines. Alexei had been right about the figure wearing a dress they'd seen at the river. He was a man, not a woman, dressed as a Shasquas. There was a young woman who never took her eyes off of Lewis. When they arrived at the village, the chief there introduced himself as Claw of Jaguar and presented Lewis with a spear covered with an infinity of carvings. All were invited into the village. Once inside, they found an immense wooden plank covered with food. Driven by hunger, without even asking, they sat down to eat. Nobody made noise. Nobody complained. Only hands and mouths moved, their cheeks filled with pleasure. They were not ceremonious, eating everything they found in front of them. After they'd finished eating, they all felt overwhelmed. They relaxed and reflected on everything. Were they dreaming? After relaxing for a little, they were taken to huts, where they would spend the rest of the day and that night. It was not necessary to ask if they were tired. The cold of the previous night and the hard rocks had left their muscles sore, and falling onto the soft blankets, they fell asleep immediately. Lewis woke up late that night. He thought it was all a dream, but as he sat looking around, he sees it's real. Then he notices the shape of a woman's figure under the blanket. He asks himself, who could it be? The woman who adorned the bed woke up and greeted him with a kiss. I slept with the wife of the chief of the tribe, he thought. He hurried out of the cabin and found his friends, who were fascinated looking towards the valley. What a beautiful sight, they said. I thought I was dreaming, Lewis said. They invite Lewis to look at the valley dressed in green, the river snaking in the light of the moon. The woman who adorned his bed silently appears next to him. Tiredness returns to win them, so they return to their cabins. When they wake up early in the morning, their clothes have been changed. Their trousers replaced with skirts, their shirts for vests, and their shoes with sandals. They meet again in the big hut, called to have breakfast. Jaguar Claw welcomes them. He says they've been waiting for them, and gives thanks for their prayers being answered. Alexei is incredulous and asks how to get to the city, but gets no reply. The chief of the tribe continues speaking, and Alexei continues to translate. After eating food, they're invited to leave the hut. A crowd was waiting for them. Lewis will change his name. He will be called Lascar from that moment on. The shaman woman appeared with something in her hand, putting it around his neck, and puts something on his head. The woman who appeared in his bed the night before is his wife, the wife of the real Lascar. She is happy. She is happy he's returned. The whole tribe is also. Finally, he is given a wooden club, the same one he used defending himself the day before. He doesn't understand it all. He's led around the whole village to meet everyone. As he's walking with the woman who loves him, he remembers that the night they slept in the valley, they'd heard the neighing of horses. He tells Alexei to ask Jaguar Claw about the horses. The chief says that they are animals that do not mate with the llamas. Lascar asks to go and see them. Alexei explains how these animals arrived in the Americas before the conquistadors. Someone wrote the story wrong, he said. Just as the chief was offering the horses to Lascar, they heard some people shouting. They did not believe what their eyes saw. It was a couple arguing, but that was not what caught their attention. It was an African man arguing with an indigenous woman. When they noticed Lascar looking at them, the man greeted them in Quechua. Lascar replied in Spanish. Both are surprised. Alexei is most intrigued as an archaeologist because nothing fits with the history our books speak of. The 6 of them, including the African citizen, returned to Pisac. That night, as every night, the village is crowded. The time was coming for the celebration of harvesting the land. Lascar and his wife, Flor Tigridima, Flower of Broom, begin the lifting of the fruits granted by the Mama Pacha. Lascar was learning Quechua. Although he was a native of the Andes, he did not speak that language. He loved being there, living with his people. The date for gratitude to the land came, the feast of the Inti Raymi. Atahualpa is supposed to come to preside over the feast, and Huascar plans to intercept him on his way there to warn him of Pizarro. Knowing he would be traveling there, they prepared to ambush him outside of the city. They waited a long time before seeing Atahualpa's caravan. Finally they intercept him, and Huascar tries to warn him not to trust Pizarro, that he should kill him and his men, and that if he doesn't, Pizarro will do the same to him. Kill Pizarro and his people and offer their bodies to the sublime condor. But Atahualpa doesn't believe him. The result is a cruel battle. Huascar knew that would happen. But Huascar isn't a coward anymore. He's become a good warrior, thanks to CHMP, the African man. While they fight, Atahualpa yells, "I killed you once and I will kill you again, traitor dog. Not only do you want all the land, you took the woman I love." Because Huascar was well prepared, Atahualpa can't defeat him and retreats with his men, which gives rise to a problem. Who would officiate over the Inti Raymi? George offers to do so, for he is a mystic man of many beliefs. He says that he was an Inca warrior in one of his past lives. When the first Spanish invaders were making themselves present, one of the tribes had found one of them wandering in the mountains, captured him, and took him to Pisac. This one was not an invader exactly. He was a man with education, collecting knowledge. As he wasn't a dangerous man, he'd become a teacher in the village. He was there for the festival and was excited to meet Huascar. On the day of the Inti Raymi, Huascar dressed in the royal costume with the help of his two friends and the tribe's people. The ceremony was a beautiful spectacle. Huascar approached his hometown people as any dirty politician of his day would do. He felt as if he was deceiving them, because he was taking the place of the one who had disappeared at the hands of his elder half-brother, Atahualpa. His intention was to prevent the Spanish invasion, and thus save their lands from the poverty waiting in the future. Not only these lands, all the Americas, from south to north. Months passed quickly. He's kept informed by the roadrunner called Chasquis, the one who'd spotted them at the river. Thanks to him, the news of Pizarro's arrival in his territory comes to his ears. He also heard that Atahualpa was afraid of him, and was planning to meet Pizarro to try to get help from the white men, because it was said they were gods. Atahualpa believed that was true. Huascar had no time. He put together an army. He left his tribe, his pregnant wife, and his friends, to go to Cajamarca trying to prevent Atahualpa from meeting with Pizarro. He knew that if Atahualpa reached Pizarro first, that he would be killed. So he began his journey north. He came across the Shanka tribe, joined by other tribes who also wanted Atahualpa to be deposed. They crossed Tiquio, the highest point of the Andes. On their way they found European invaders thirsting for wealth. They waged battles with them, defending their lands. They also found more African citizens, brought by the Europeans to be used as slaves. They became his bodyguards, commanded by CHMP. He knew that many tribes wanted both him and his brother dead, because in times past they and their father had tormented every small tribe in their eagerness to rule all the land. On their way north they also had to fight a battle with the full brother of Atahualpa. He also wanted to end Huascar. He hadn't believed Atahualpa when he'd heard that Huascar had returned. Arriving in Cajamarca, he would have confrontations with more conquistadors, all of whom would fall in battle, defeated by his army. He was joined by a cousin of his, Piquichaki, Flea's Feet, a young warrior, but a veteran of many battles. Piquichaki had a pending debt with Atahualpa and was anxious to reach him. As he got further north, he found his way was blocked by many tribes trying to prevent him from reaching Atahualpa. Huascar did not wish to reach Atahualpa. He wished to prevent him from reaching Pizarro. On his way he met a young cacique named Cahuida, a warrior and former servant of his, who had betrayed him not long ago, having believed Pizarro's promise to grant him land. He also found Manco, who would later be crowned as Manco Inca in 1533 by Francisco Pizarro, trying to make it appear that he'd return power to the Inca people. When Manco Inca and Cahuida would come to understand that Pizarro had deceived them, they would rise up in arms against him, taking his military center at Sasayuman. But that same year, 1533, Pizarro finished both of them. Cahuida famously falling to his death from one of the towers of the stone fortress. Lascar had wanted to make a deal with them, but had no intention of giving them land. Lascar promised to divide the land into 4 pieces, on the condition of getting their help to defeat Pizarro. Cahuite and Manco Inca both wanted more. Ambition had taken possession of them, so Lascar could not make deal with them, and fought with them but could not defeat them. They fled in search of Pizarro, which was reported to Lascar by an undercover warrior working for Pizarro. The news hurried his journey north. The next day they reached a wide valley, in the middle of it an Inca fortification of megalithic walls, and within it many small cabins, the perfect place for an ambush. He knew the Spanish invaders were hiding in there, waiting. Lascar, knowing the events of the past, had no intention of entering the citadel, with the invaders waiting for him. The invaders were at a disadvantage. They had no escape, only the luck factor. They wanted Lascar and his army to make their entrance and thus to end them. Atahualpa they hoped to dispose of easily, taking advantage of his belief that they were gods. The citadel seemed deserted. There was no activity. After a long time they spotted an Indian crossing the square from one side to the other side, the same one who had given them the position of the invaders. He was leading 5 individuals on horses, a religious man among them. As they left the citadel and grew closer, Alexei asked, "Louis, is this what you're waiting for? If you finish these people, your existence might end right here. You may be the direct descendant of one of those individuals. I don't care. I want to end these people who are going to do a lot of harm to my lands. They bring misery and poverty. That way I will prevent the future misery of my Americas. If I'm triumphant, I will sail to where the ground is dressed in white and the auroras illuminate the night sky. We will bring knowledge. We will speak to the tribes of the wickedness of the white man. I want a future where my brothers walk these lands without anyone asking, 'Where are you going?' We should be free forever." The small group on horseback came closer. Upon reaching them, one of the younger Pizarros introduces the religious man, who invites them to enter the citadel. "I come bringing the word of God. Leave all your weapons and enter the citadel. The house of God does not allow violence," he says. "We do not want your God. I want all of you out of my land," Lascar says in Spanish. That surprises the invaders. Lascar and his men then kill the welcoming party except for the Indian double agent, Filipillo. He was the one who brought the scourge to these lands. There were still many more invaders in the citadel, and they were not alone. Also waiting for them were the Shanka warriors, enemies of both Lascar and Atahualpa. In the battle that follows, Lascar is faced with another Pizarro brother. While they fight, Pizarro asks, "Who are you?" Lascar replies, "I am an immigration officer. I represent the United States of the Andes and the Rocky Mountains. Your entry to my lands is being denied." Lascar killed the second Pizarro, and while his army was destroying all of his soldiers in a cruel battle, he thought that everything would end there. He thought there was only one more Pizarro left, and only 100 more of his men. But Jorge, the Spanish scholar they'd met earlier, told him, "Sir, this is not yet finished. You've killed only 2 of the 5 Pizarro brothers. There are still 3 more, and more than 400 men with them, all armed with muskets and pistols." Lascar did not ask Jorge anything more. He thought he already knew everything based on his knowledge of history from the future. The only date he was concerned with was November 16, 1532, the day before Atahualpa would be captured by Pizarro on November 17, 1532. He still has time to save his brother. He leaves the ruins of the battle, hurrying to find him. He wishes to save Atahualpa. He wishes to save the life of the last Inca. A silence flooded the atmosphere. The old Alejandrina remained silent while her young grandchildren looked at her. "That's all? Did they save the empire?" The old woman, with pain, says, "No, children. History cannot be changed. Lascar is still there. He is still in 1532. The story continues. It will be very exciting. There's going to be the Great Inca Rebellion. Good night, children. See you soon." End of Book 1. By Luis Herrera, herrerawoodshop@gmail.com.